G'day legends, in this video we're going to be talking about the comments that Dricus Du Plessis' team made about Dricus not taking any takedowns in the Israel Adesanya fight. Firstly, let us set the table. UFC 305 is going to be taking place in a couple of weeks. The Battle for Africa that is going to be happening over in Perth, Australia for some reason. Obviously, UFC 305 is following UFC 304, the Manchester, England card, which was put on at the wrong time zone for the English fans for some reason, and before UFC 306, the Mexican Independence Day card, headlined by an American, happening in America. The UFC is truly kicking all kinds of goals right now, aren't they? So, with the Battle for Africa happening in Australia, the hype train has started to build. And I do believe going into that fight, as I put out in yesterday's video, that Dricus Du Plessis is going to be losing that fight because of the counter-striking of Israel Adesanya. Now, you know when you're looking at MMA fights and you feel that struggle between your heart and your brain and you really want a particular fighter to win? I would love it if Dricus Du Plessis went out there and just won it in August. But my brain is just telling me that Israel Adesanya is one of those kind of fighters that can pull that perfect counter shot and lay Dricus Du Plessis out. So I would love to see Dricus put in some of that grappling style, implement, and I know that this is going to get a lot of backlash as well, but implement a sort of Bilal Muhammad, Leon Edwards offensive plan against Israel Adesanya. What do I mean? I mean pressure him up against the cage and then dump him on his head and take him down to the ground where Israel Adesanya is at his weakest. That does seem to be like the best course of action for Dricus Du Plessis going into this fight. And I understand when fighters want to build up a fight and hype up a fight, sometimes their teams just come out and say stuff like this. We've heard Magomed Ankalayev's team, Ali Abdelaziz, pretending to be Magomed Ankalaev on Twitter, talking about how Magomed isn't going to take down Alex Pereira. He wants to stand there and strike with him. Which, when it comes to Magomed, that might be true. I mean, Magomed Ankalaev, even though he's got the Omavov last name, doesn't actually take a lot of people down. He is known for his stand-up striking, much like Shada Bullet this weekend. However, having said all of that, Dricus Du Plessis is known for his takedowns. He has got a great takedown game plan, and I hope that this is more than just trying to build up the fight and hype up the fight. The only thing that makes me question whether or not this is that circumstance where a coach is just trying to say something to sell a fight, is that this fight has already got the Battle for Africa hashtag connected to it. This might be one of the biggest fights the UFC could naturally make this year. And what do I mean by that? I mean slotting Alex Pereira into UFC 300, the BMF belt between Max Holloway and Justin Gaethje. These are all things that the UFC have sort of created to make them big fights. But an actual rivalry, a real blood rivalry, especially one that Israel Adesanya has made it, turn this into a race rivalry. But a real rivalry like this doesn't need any more build-up. And if the UFC did want to build this up even more, they could have done it over in South Africa, but they chose to go with Perth, Australia instead, even though Israel Adesanya lives and trains in New Zealand. And the UFC have done events in Auckland before. I don't know what the UFC are doing anymore. Either way, when it comes to Dricus's coach saying these things, I don't think it needs any more build-up. So I think he should go for that wrestling sort of style. But here is where the issue comes in with that wrestling sort of style. When you're a contender, making your way up the rankings, getting wins, it's okay to implement that sort of wrestling style. But I have noticed with the UFC and MMA fan base that once you start to enter that top 5, top 10, being a heavy wrestler does mean that you cop a lot of backlash and a lot of hate from the fans. You do not win yourself a fan base being a wrestler. And even worse, when you're a champion that is a wrestler, that is when you get a phenomenal amount of backlash. And fighters are human beings. They have egos. I mean, let's draw this down just a little bit. I do this myself as well. Obviously, you want fighters to go in there and win. I am notorious for hating Mateusz Gamrot, for slowing down the lightweight division, because I like stand-up strikers, I like watching a Muay Thai fight go down, and too much wet blanket wrestling really annoys me. And therefore, I have grown up to hate Mateusz Gamrot and his fluky, wet blanket wrestling style. And that sort of sentiment does seem to transfer across the wider MMA world. Look at people hating on Bilal Muhammad. Look at all the people hating on Merab Dvalishvili. Look at all the people who go ahead and say, yeah, Khabib was dominant, but have you ever actually watched one of his fights? They'll put you to sleep. I mean, Tyquil Woodley, everyone was out there saying all he does is wrestle and lean on people. He puts you to sleep early in Kamaru Usman's career, back when he was only giving 30% and just wet blanketing people. The general MMA audience hates wrestlers, and the fighters know this. And because fighters have egos, they want to go out there and sell their fight. Plus, they constantly have the UFC management whispering in their ear about pay-per-view sales and growing an audience. And that too makes them want to go out there and stand and strike. This whole sentiment gets ingrained in fighters so much that a fighter will go out there, stand opposite Alex Poatan Pereira, and allow him to swing that hook, even if they have takedowns, even if they have jiu-jitsu on the ground. They will stand there in front of Poatan Pereira with their chin in the air, proving that they can go and box with him. And I do hope that Dricus Du Plessis doesn't fall into that same sort of category that other fighters can fall into, where they do not want to let the fans down, so they end up just standing there and trying to strike it out with the fighter across from them. When they do the right game plan and decide to go for takedowns, I want to bring up the example of MVP versus Ian Garry. MVP versus Ian Garry was one of those fights that started on the feet, and Ian Garry quickly realized that he wasn't pacing up MVP. No matter what he says in the post-fight interview, he wasn't pacing up MVP, and he could feel those punches landing on his chin. So he started implementing a heavy grappling style. But Ian Garry started getting so much hate for that online because of how boring the fight was, because of how he didn't try and get the finish, because of how he couldn't even submit MVP. That was just Ian Garry showing that he can use multiple levels of MMA to try and get himself a win, and the fans did not appreciate it. Now, the one counter argument to that could be, it's Ian Garry. Everyone hates Ian Garry. It's obvious why everyone hates Ian Garry. His wife is in control of him. But we've had so many other wrestlers in the UFC that just get called boring because of how much wrestling they do. I don't think it's just because Ian Garry is an absolute rooster. I think it's because it is that wrestling style as well. So Dricus, he might be scared to implement that style against Israel Adesanya and go for that high pressure style and keep rushing at him. Can Dricus win that way? He can. We have seen the CKB guys, the city kickboxing guys, hate people who come forward and pressure them. CKB kickboxers like to create a lot of space, circle around and start to pick and choose their shot. They're the thinking man's gym. And when you do just come rushing at them straight down the center line and put on high pressure, that is when they get beaten. Dan Hooker gets beaten that way. Kai Kara France gets beaten that way. Israel Adesanya got beaten that way against Sean Strickland. I think Sean Strickland is the type of fight style that beats Israel Adesanya's fight style 9 times out of 10. So if Dricus Du Plessis can implement that sort of style and come forward, the problem is, as we have seen with these CKB guys, if you are not coming forward with a clean, crisp kickboxing style, high pressure, high guard, they do catch you. We've seen Carlos Ulberg do the same thing, CKB fighter, catch his opponent on the way in. We've seen Israel Adesanya do the same thing against Alex Pereira. We saw him do it against Robert Whittaker. They love looking for that counter shot. So I do think that the team of Dricus Du Plessis should mix in some of the grappling, go for that Bilal Muhammad, Leon Edwards style of fight. Jab, jab, takedown, push him up against the cage, make it gritty, make it nasty. Hopefully, this is just talk from Dricus Du Plessis, because the smart thing to do would be to just push Izzy up against the cage, dunk him on his ass, and start raining down elbows for the top. And let's get the win for the man that breathes African air every single day. Let me know, what do you think about Dricus Du Plessis' coach's comments down there in these comment sections. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead, give it a like. If it's your first time around here, why don't you subscribe to the channel? We do live streams. We try and do daily videos. We do watch-alongs when they're not on at 2 a.m. in the morning. Until then, you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you all in the next video.